Mr. President, last week I came to the floor to talk briefly about the news reports we've all been seeing surrounding the proposed merger between Pfizer and AstraZeneca, and the legislative proposals we are seeing from members of Congress in response to that merger. As you know, one of the key details in this merger is that when Pfizer, a large American company, acquires AstraZeneca, another large but somewhat smaller UK company, they plan to incorporate the new merged company in the United Kingdom, not here in the U.S. And as I said last week, I was concerned to learn of these plans, as were many of us here in Congress. After all, Pfizer is an iconic American company with over 100,000 employees. It ranks in the top 200 of global companies by revenue, according to the Fortune Global 500 list. It would be a great loss to our country to see it incorporated offshore. Still, it's difficult to blame them for this decision. According to sources, a desire to escape the high U.S. corporate tax is part of the motivation for this merger. This type of transaction, where a U.S. corporation merges with a foreign entity and incorporates elsewhere to escape the U.S. tax net, is sometimes referred to as an inversion. Inversions are a growing problem here in the United States. Indeed, large companies are leaving our country at an alarming rate. If you count the number of American corporations in the worldwide list of Fortune 500 companies, you'll see that the number has declined dramatically over the past decade, which is very unfortunate. This decline means less capital and less investment in the United States. It means a smaller U.S. tax base. And most importantly, it means more jobs that could be created, that should be created here in America, are being created elsewhere. So make no mistake, Mr. President, inversions are a big problem. And the problem seems to be growing every day. And as I mentioned here on the floor last week, there are, broadly speaking, two different ways Congress could act to address this problem. The first way would be to make it more difficult for a U.S. corporation to invert. That's the approach, my friend, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee endorsed a few days ago in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. As the chairman noted in his opinion piece, current law requires companies moving overseas to have at least 20% new ownership to avoid some very bad tax consequences. His proposal, the one he outlined in this article, would be to increase that benchmark to 50% for all inversions taking place after May 8th of this year. That means his proposal restriction would be retroactive for all inversions that happened between last Thursday and the date his proposal may be signed into law. Of course, this is hardly a new idea. President Obama included a similar proposal in his budget. Given the amount of hand-wringing we've seen over just the Pfizer-AstraZeneca merger and the subsequent erosion of the U.S. tax base from my friends on the other side, you think a proposal like the one the chairman floated in his op-ed would raise a significant amount of revenue. However, if you think that, you'd be wrong. All told, his proposal would raise roughly $17 billion over 10 years. That's about $1.7 billion a year. Now, that's not really an insignificant sum, but it does demonstrate that the scope of the problem is hardly worth the draconian solution some of my friends want to impose in order to solve it. Let me be clear. I share my colleagues' concerns about the number of inversions that have taken place over the last few years. However, I do not believe that imposing confusing and arbitrary retroactive restrictions on U.S. companies is the answer. There is an alternative approach, which brings us to the second way Congress could act to prevent more inversions. The second way to address the problem of inversions is to make the United States a more desirable location to headquarter businesses. While it will require a lot of work and compromise, this is by far the better approach. This approach, of course, means lowering the corporate tax rate. It also means replacing our antiquated worldwide tax system, or taxation system. Under current law, U.S. corporations are taxed on their worldwide income, but foreign corporations are subject to tax only on income arising from the United States. In other words, we subject our corporations to a worldwide tax system while subjecting foreign corporations to a territorial tax system. On top of that, most of our major trading partners, tax companies, domiciled in their own countries on a territorial base as well, unlike our country. Long story short, our system of worldwide taxation places us at a competitive disadvantage and makes the U.S. a less than optimal place for companies to locate their businesses. That being the case, as important as it is to get the corporate tax rate down, no matter how low we get that rate, we still need to scrap and replace our outdated worldwide taxation system. That is why tax reform is so important. It's just one of the reasons, of course, but it's a really important reason. Tax reform, if it's done right, will get at the root problem rather than simply dealing with symptoms. I should note that inversions are only one symptom of our dysfunctional international tax rules. Other types of transactions further illustrate why the entire system that we have is problematic. For example, there are strong incentives currently for a U.S. parent company to sell its foreign subsidiaries to foreign corporations in order to escape the U.S. tax net. There are strong incentives to set up a startup business as a foreign corporation. Neither of these transactions are inversions, but they do show the point that it is, for tax purposes, often better not to be a U.S. corporation or to be controlled by one. And while these other sorts of transactions don't grab headlines like inversions do, they are nonetheless indicative of real problems in our tax code. That being the case, a proposal to restrict or eliminate inversions would really only go after one particular type of problem, leaving the rest of the fundamental flaws in our tax system firmly in place. Proposals to restrict inversions or to impose some sort of management and control test are like trying to plug the dike with your fingers to keep capital and jobs from flowing overseas. These proposals are not long-term solutions. They're not even good short-term fixes. Another example of business activity flowing overseas that readily comes to mind is the problem we're facing with the medical device industry. We are losing our innovative medical device companies because of our stupid tax system and the 2.3% tax on sales or gross income of our medical device companies, a lot of which haven't made a profit yet but would be taxed even though they're not making profits, but will make profits if they can keep going with their innovative and good ideas. We know that thanks to Obamacare's medical device tax, some of America's most innovative companies in an industry that's vital to our healthcare system are moving jobs overseas. Yet where's the call from the leadership on the other side to do something about this? In fact, there's nothing but stultification of legislation to solve this problem, which I think almost any intelligent person would want to do. As it stands, it appears not to alarm my friends on the other side when business activity flees the country as a result of punitive tax under Obamacare. Yet if a company with a large revenue base takes taxes into account when considering mergers and acquisitions, the alarm bells sound and legislation is put forward in no time. I'd say there's a bit of inconsistency on the part of some of my colleagues who claim that they want to keep jobs and business in the United States. Well, if they do, why aren't they doing something about this stupid tax on medical device companies? We had a vote on this earlier in the year on a bill that didn't go through both houses, and the leadership knew it wouldn't go through, where we had 79 votes in favor of abolishing this tax. There's a wide bipartisan support to get rid of it. What's wrong with the other side here that we have to continue to fight to try and get rid of something that 79 people in the Senate voted to get rid of. And by the way, I believe that if we brought it up true blue and in and of itself, it would pass here with probably 95 votes. If people give any consideration to American business, American ingenuity, solving the problems of health care, bringing health care costs down that medical devices can do, and saving lives. It's no small reason why some of these medical device companies are moving overseas, where they're treated far better than we treat them here. 79 people voted to get rid of that stupid tax. And yet the leadership of this body won't allow it to be brought up freestanding or on some bill that basically has a chance of passage through both houses of Congress. Now, there is, of course, bipartisan legislation that would correct the problems we face with the medical device tax, namely a bill introduced by Senator Klobuchar and myself. And I commend her for it. She's had a lot of guts, plus a lot of ability to work on this bill. Sadly, the Senate Democratic leadership has, thus far, refused to allow an up or down vote on the measure, even though we know it has broad bipartisan support, as I've heretofore mentioned. My hope is that this will change with the upcoming debate over tax extenders, but I'm not holding my breath. Given our ongoing experience with the medical device tax, I have to say I'm a little skeptical when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say they are concerned about American companies moving addresses and operations out of the country. Indeed, if they were really so bothered by this, we would have repealed this medical device tax a long time ago. Finally, Madam President, I would just like to give a brief aside on the topic of retroactive changes to our tax laws. In my view, stability and predictability are bedrock principles of the law. When it comes to our tax code, we've gotten away from that over the years. Restoring these principles to our tax system should be one of our main goals of tax reform. Put simply, retroactive changes to the law, the kind envisioned by my colleagues' op-ed, are the antithesis of stability and predictability and will only make tax reform that much harder. No matter how well-intentioned and no matter how large the short-run revenue gains are to be had from retroactive changes, I believe the long-term effects are harmful, and in my opinion, such proposals should be viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism. I know my colleague is very sincere in making the points that he has, but I have to rebut those points, and I believe I've done so effectively. Once again, Madam President, the effort to prevent tax-motivated inversions can be boiled down and separated into two basic camps. One side would have us simply address the problem and impose arbitrary and perhaps costly restrictions on American businesses to prevent them from leaving the country. The other side would make the U.S. a better place to do business, preventing companies from wanting to leave in the first place and inviting new ones to form and prosper here. Only one of these approaches will actually fix the problem. Only one of these approaches will help create jobs and grow the economy. And only one of these approaches will put our nation on a path to greater prosperity. That approach is, of course, comprehensive tax reform. That is what is needed. That is where our focus should be. As I said last week as the ranking member of the Senate's Tax Writing Committee, my focus when it comes to the problem of inversions is to fix the underlying problems, not to tinker on the edges, focusing on the symptoms. I hope that eventually that is the approach we take. I want to thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.